But I'm very privileged to be here, and I'm thankful for Gonzalo and the organizers for inviting me. I've also obliged Gonzalo in not having any PowerPoint slides, and I'm addicted to PowerPoint. So please be patient with me, as I don't normally have notes, but I have notes instead of slides, so I'll see how I get on. My first attempt without PowerPoint. So anyway, the title of this session is Innovation and Sustainable Use of Water in Industry in Cities. And it's a huge topic for just 10 minutes or so. So I could talk about the innovations that reduce or reuse or recycle water, however vital they are. But I want to restrict my comments to briefly touch on the innovations that are actually required to quantify sustainable water use, whether it be in industry or cities or agriculture. And why is this so important? Because I would argue our current inability to adequately determine what sustainable water use is at a particular location represents one of the greatest obstacles we face in water management generally, but particularly in its stewardship. Most of the time we've got no idea whatsoever of what we're aiming for. I mean, what is the sustainable water use of this particular area or this particular part of Madrid, for example? I reckon there are very few people, if any, that could actually tell us that. And we have no clear sustainability endpoint, and in the absence of that, we just keep hearing, well, our corporate goal is going to save 20% more water by 2020, and then I guess there'll be another sort of efficiency goal that will follow that, and of course, that's not going to work. So this lack of clear process for quantifying sustainable water use is really exacerbating several challenges that industry and cities face, particularly in terms of governance. And Peter touched on earlier the importance of governance, and I cannot stress that enough. So how can you begin to engage in governance of a catchment when you don't even know what you're aiming for? What is sustainable water use at a particular location? It encourages weak participatory processes, it doesn't strengthen those. It gets in the way of high-level commitments for organizations, large industries, to actually make the level of savings that they're required for sustainable water use and such like. So I visit large industrial installations all the time, and the question is, do we need to save 5% water? Well, you could do that with various reduce activities, or do we need to save 30% water? Well, you're not going to do that with a few little tinkering around the edges. That means substantial recycle type technologies or reuse, a completely different way of thinking about how we manage water. So without these relevant targets, we're going to struggle. We're going to either underinvest or maybe even overinvest. We're not going to get the right balance between investment and risk. So to date, water reduction activity has been largely self-determined rather than actually setting robust and meaningful water targets that take into account the unique nature of every basin. And I hope everyone's familiar with that term, basin, catchment, watershed. We use that interchangeably. Now, of course, as most of you will know in this room, these are called context-based water targets. They're potentially a controversial area, but I believe personally they're the most credible indicator of sustainable water use. The challenge is getting that sort of information and being able to convey it. And setting these targets is not a quick process. Which I'll come on to, and the World Wildlife Fund have pointed this out recently, but they're potentially the last target we need. If we know what we're going to aim for, if we understand and fully characterize what sustainable water use is at a location, then we've got something that won't change because the environmental flow requirements will stay pretty much the same. The only thing that will have to adapt to that will be the industries, the cities, the agriculture to accommodate it. So they're to show this finish line and not the next benchmark. And once you know what that finish line looks like, you're able to start planning that journey effectively and focusing resources on it. You're able to produce the frameworks that ensure a production site or city's performance is within the capacity of the basin's renewable supply of water and its ability to assimilate pollutants. So, in a world that is set to face ongoing water quality and quantity challenges, these targets, these context-based water targets, are all about working towards an end state that ensures long-term business viability for operations and supply chains. So we know also that water is the ultimate enabler of value creation. If Businesses do not act if we do not work with them to create tools that will drive change. People and nature will never live in a water-secure world. And I read a report recently by the World Wildlife Fund who said they've lost over 80% of freshwater species in the last 4 decades and facing a further future in which we'll no longer have enough water for people and businesses. You know the sort of scenarios that we're trying to convey. Well, developing science-based targets is certainly not a new concept. They've been deployed already as part of a strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, very much in line with IPCC and the guidance to keep global temperatures below 2 degrees centigrade, where you establish system boundaries, thresholds, you produce an allocation system for greenhouse gases, you communicate that back to industries, the big users, etc., and then you have a target system that respects those thresholds. However, compared to carbon, water is ever so much more complicated, hugely complicated. You know, water is a common resource. It's so much different from carbon. It's highly localized. If we, I always get nervous when we talk about global water issues. Yes, water is a global concern, but ultimately it's all about what's happening locally. It's highly localized. It has huge variability temporally, day to day. The quality can change within hours. After storm events and such like. It has all these social, environmental, economic uses that are valued differently by different users and such like. So it's a highly complex resource to work with. So if we're actually going to define truly sustainable water use and undertake the environmental flow elements, the social dynamics, a perspective, the economics, whatever, we really have a big challenge on our plate. So it's not surprising then that we kind of keep putting this off. And focus on some sort of short-term water reduction activity that would reduce 10%. We all feel very pleased with ourselves without really knowing what we need to aim for. And the enormity then and the complexity of understanding what truly sustainable water use is at a location, in my opinion, is only tempered by one thing, and that is the pace of technology development. And that's why I wanted to introduce this concept of innovation and sustainable water use, because it's absolutely essential that we take advantage of all the great technologies that are now arriving as part of the fourth industrial revolution, as it's called. Personally, I believe it's our only hope to try and manage the complexity of this challenge that we face, particularly as water is a shared resource. And as I've kind of mentioned a moment ago, as this water crisis looms, we are too busy advocating solutions without first really grasping what level of performance we need to achieve at a particular location now and in the future. And innovation that supports robust quantification of sustainable water use will in turn drive the breakthrough innovations in water savings and enabling technologies. The one flows from the other. And unless we truly grasp the magnitude of the gap between actual water use and sustainable water use, we cannot determine whether, again, we're underinvesting or overinvesting in those technologies, or we certainly couldn't communicate all the value that those technologies create and their full return on investment, etc. And so underpinning this whole area is this word confidence. It's such a key word that as we begin to apply these great technologies that are coming through, and it's truly amazing what we're able to do now, and these things are very recent, there is this theme that runs through that we need to improve confidence. Confidence in the frameworks, the algorithms, the economic evaluations of value add, what we need to do, and of course the data itself. And then if we have that high level of confidence in the result, this is truly what your sustainable water use is at a location, then I believe that confidence would drive the business models and the necessary investment to deliver it. So not having this goal to start with, not having a thorough understanding of what sustainable water use is really hampering a lot of things in terms of innovation on business models, but also as we invest. So what are these innovations? And I realize I'm running out of time. Well, the first is the insights that we're now able to gather at the basin level. For time's sake, I won't go through some of the strategies that we're trying to develop, what we call a layered approach around abstraction points and catchment per abstraction, etc., the integration of satellite data and remote sensing and such like. But our ability today to track and mitigate water-related risks is increasing very dramatically. So we have satellite imagery, other forms of Earth observation, we've got remote sensing, IoT, AI, all these new buzzwords that we're really able to get quite a good grip now on evapotranspiration rates for different land covers, etc., to really map in quite a lot of detail. I was talking to Gonzalo in Brussels the other week, and he was talking about illegal abstraction in this country. Was it 700,000 to 1 million illegal abstraction points, and how in a dry season you can now spot that from space. I think we've not had rainfall at this location for 4 weeks, so why have we got so much moisture sitting on the surface of this soil and vegetation and such like? So we need technology to really grasp these really fundamental issues that we have. Secondly, and quite briefly, we have got a whole variety of tools now to really get to grip with quantifying water risk. It's one thing to understand water and how much it is, but how do you then translate that into a risk, and then how do you mitigate that risk, etc. And the company I work for, Ecolab, it's a global provider of water, hygiene and energy technologies. We've been working with Microsoft and developing a whole variety of tools, and we start with sensors connected to what is now 36,000 water systems in over 100 countries across 5 continents, and in a year we collect billions of data points, particularly in relation to cooling systems, which are the largest industrial user of water most of the time. And then we take that data, we analyze it to look at efficiency improvements, but also to cut water usage, but also to tie that usage to the context of that local basin, that local encatchment, so we can make much more informed decisions about the level of savings that we need to adopt. So it has to start with data and reliable platforms and security of data and all the analytics that flow from that data, to have that real-time element, because things are moving so quickly within a basin, within a catchment. Unless you aim for real-time information and respond accordingly, again, you can easily be misled on what truly sustainable water use is. I'm also involved personally with setting basin targets for a lot of our customers, and that was a really daunting task at first, but now I've been doing it for some time. I realize just how much information there is on the web to guide that whole process. There's masses of information on rainfall data and losses and abstractions, etc., and other users, big water users within a defined location, and such like. And all of this we want to distill into catchment goals that we then disseminate to all the stakeholders that are present. Thirdly, very quickly, blockchain, and we could talk for an hour about blockchain, but its technology, it's a bit of a buzzword, its technology could really transform the way water resources are managed and traded, providing a secure, transparent, really key word, transparent, and distributed ledger to record all the transactions between parties. It's this radical transparency that will create a lot less information asymmetry that we have at the moment. We want to harness this capability to enable everyone, from individuals to farmers to water managers and policymakers, to access the same data set on water at a particular location. And such transparency would help inform consumer decisions around when to conserve or use water. It also helps to manage a lot of the corruption that we see around the world in relation to quantities recorded and qualities, etc. It also supports peer-to-peer trading of water rights in a given basin, empowering water users who have enough or willing to share their allocation resources with others, and they could do that on a 24/7 basis without relying on some sort of centralized authority. And this is very much aligned to the kind of stakeholder inclusive process that sits at the heart of water stewardship. And I was reading an article from the World Economic Forum recently that said, quote, "Imagine a scenario where farmers in the same water basin could make the decision to trade their allocations based on the latest weather data, crop prices, market trends, and longer-term climate trends, much of which is already accessible via their mobile phones." So we want to break this working in silos, the public, the private, the farmers, challenging sector. Hope there's no farmers in the room. And energy producers, we've got to really face this. And fourthly, this big question about the urban and industrial, do we decentralize or do we work together with a common strategy, and what are the investment elements of both of those? It's a really crucial part of innovation that we need now, and all the recycle strategies that flow from that, whether we need kind of the purple pipe distribution that we see in California, etc. And then just in conclusion, another area where we need a lot of innovation is around the business models. This is so fundamental. I know I'm talking to economists and I'm a mere chemist, But in my view, I see this as absolutely fundamental to changing behavior, is to change the business models, and then of course the nature of the investment that flows from those business models, and to really lever the Internet of Things and AI and all these essential technologies that are now coalescing and coming together to understand how to provide performance guarantees, to how to deliver on sustainability goals, how to get the insights, the actions that we need on a very short-term basis to respond to very short-term events that occur within basins and such like. So in conclusion, if we cannot quantify location-specific sustainable water use, and if we cannot determine its value at that location, socially, environmentally, economically, how can we even begin to develop an adequate understanding of the impacts of population growth, the impact of climate change, urbanization, land use change? We need a benchmark. We need this end state to understand, to recalibrate our thinking in these areas. And we've been talking about these subjects for so long, and yet the action to address them doesn't seem to match the urgency of the scale of these challenges. So this is why I believe passionately a different approach is needed, and we shouldn't put off this challenging, complex aim of understanding sustainable water use. So final sentence, we either collectively face a choice of continuing as we are, setting incremental, internal, efficiency-related targets, and put everyone's assets at risk, or embrace and engage in fundamentally shifting towards catchment target paradigms that will maintain key thresholds of sustainability and enable all of us to thrive. Thank you very much.